Hi, this is Brad Meadows. I can't get to the phone right now. Please leave me your name and your number, and I will get.
I should unmute myself. There we go. Good morning and welcome to day 3 of the ELAP Conference. I'm Jen McLaren, Conference Co-Chair, and we are so excited to have all of you joining us for our last day of the conference and for all the awesome presentations. Today's focus is laboratory and efficiency and performance improvement, so there'll be plenty of useful information for you to implement into your labs. We have just a few housekeeping things before we move on. As an attendee, you can't unmute yourself or turn your camera on. Any questions you wish to pose to our presenters can be done through the Q&A chat box. During today's event, feel free to send in your questions during their presentations, and we will pose all the questions to the presenters after their presentations. If you're having any technical difficulties with the event, we recommend that you leave the event and come back, as that should resolve most issues. Don't worry about missing anything. We've been posting a recording of each day of the ELAP conference on the ELAP YouTube channel for you to view at your convenience. If you have friends or coworkers who are unable to join us, this is a great way for them to view the conference later. You'll find a link to the YouTube channel in the chat box already. We also encourage you to join the fun on the ELAP Conference Slack channel. We put a link in the chat for you, so please join in. We will be leaving the Slack channel open for at least a week after the conference, so you can continue to get your questions answered and network with your colleagues. You'll even see some of our presenters there, and I'm sure they would be happy to answer questions just like if you saw them in the hallway at a conference. ELAP members are also answering questions, but if you have anything specific to your lab, it's still best to send an email to our general inbox. Now I'm going to welcome my other half, Catlin, to give us an overview of today and introduce our keynote speaker.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you for everyone for being here with us today for our final day of ELAP Con. You've been a wonderful audience, and we appreciate all your questions and interactions on Slack and through the chat box here. Your participation truly benefits everyone, and we encourage it 100%. Before I introduce our keynote speaker of the day, I'd like to quickly run through today's schedule. We're going to start off with a presentation on Lean Six Sigma from Dr. Robert Rogel, who is a Lean Six Sigma Master Black Belt, which will be followed by a presentation from Peter Husby at EPA on EPA Region 9's Laboratory Paperless Workflow Project. Next, we will hear from Eduardo Morales from WEC Laboratories about going paperless, followed by Jerry Parr with a presentation on how implementing a quality management system makes a difference. Next, we will hear from Dr. Richard Danielson about meeting California ELAP regulatory requirements through laboratory automation, followed by a presentation from Sarah Rees about the Water Board's Emergency Management Program. We will end the day with a presentation from ELAP Chief Christine Sotelo. And with that, let's get started. I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker of the day, Brad Meadows. Brad Meadows is the Vice President and Technical Director for Babcock Laboratories in Riverside, California. Over his 32 plus years in the industry, he has served in a variety of roles that include bench chemist, LIMS administrator, director of quality, and laboratory director. Brad relies heavily on key performance indicators, KPIs, to monitor laboratory operations, and is an advocate of the laboratory dashboard. As an effective business management tool, Brad attended California State University, Fresno, and graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemistry and a Master's of Business Administration with a focus in information systems. In addition, Brad is also a member of the Environmental Laboratory Technical Advisory Committee, also known as LTAC. Take it away, Brad.
Well, good morning, everyone. Caitlin, if you can hear me, if you could please let me know. I am on a bit of a lag because unfortunately I'm having to call in right now.
I can absolutely hear you. You sound great.
Excellent. All right. And waiting for my slides to come up, but I will assume that the first one is up right now so I can get going here. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to day 3 of the California ELAP Conference. Today is Lab Efficiency and Process Improvement Day. So my name, as you heard, is Brad Meadows. I'm the Vice President and Technical Director here at Babcock Labs down in Riverside. Today you're going to hear some great presentations on laboratory efficiency, everything from lean management to going paperless to laboratory automation. It's going to be a great day, so please do stick around for the entire program. Given that the program today focuses on laboratory efficiency and process improvement, I'm actually going to lead off our program today with a short discussion on something that I think is a critical aspect of driving laboratory efficiency and process improvement. We have really just a few minutes here, so my goal is to really whet your appetite on the idea and give you some general direction on where to start if you see the value in what I have to share. Today, I want to talk to you about the importance of key performance indicators as they relate to laboratory performance. So next slide, please. First, let's look at what do we really mean by productivity and efficiency. Simply stated, having high productivity means we get a lot done. We produce large amounts of goods or services, and in our case, testing services. Having an efficient lab means that we get a lot done with a minimal amount of waste or effort. In the laboratory setting, we perform tests and we generate results. To do this requires a range of resources, all of which must be acquired, they must be maintained, and must be replaced over time. For a public laboratory, this affects the budget. For the commercial laboratory, ultimately the profit. So what resources are really required to run the testing laboratory? Well, first and foremost, a laboratory needs people. This is likely the costliest resource, amounting 40 to 60% of your operating budget. Lab supplies are second on the list, and typically might cost you anywhere from 12 to 15 to maybe as high as 20%. And you must have all the necessary equipment to perform testing services, instrumentation, support equipment, and durable goods such as glassware. And let's finally not forget about the actual laboratory space where you perform the testing and the additional space needed to house the support functions like quality assurance and management. In short, there are many areas where improvements in productivity and efficiency can be made to ultimately reduce the amount of resources required to run the laboratory. Next slide, please. So now that we've sort of talked about and identified all the resource requirements in the lab, we're really ready to dive into our improvement efforts. We're all excited to make things better. However, we have to start by asking ourselves the question is how do you know that what we have actually done has actually improved anything? Well, we're all scientists here, and in science, we measure performance by developing indicators that provide objective evidence of progress. Therefore, to maximize the benefit of our efforts, we really should start with the three most significant resource requirements: people, supplies, and equipment. Data for these resources can be tracked individually, but the data can be misleading without context. For instance, as testing volume increases, so must labor. In that case, simply tracking a higher labor cost alone might not be a good indicator of laboratory efficiency. Therefore, it's often more appropriate and more informative to evaluate two factors or several in a relationship to determine the results of our efforts. So three examples might be to first track staffing requirements versus testing volume, expressed as maybe tests per person or tests per full-time equivalent. Or possibly tracking supply costs versus the number of batches, expressing that as dollars of supplies versus the total number of batches performed. And finally, maybe equipment utilization determined by comparing the number of analyses performed per instrument, or maybe tracked as a percentage of the actual throughput versus the total instrument capacity. The key here is to evaluate a relationship between factors over time so that you can determine if your new workflow takes less time than the old process, or if your new LIMS has lowered your administrative costs, or if that new preparation method you've introduced actually reduces supply costs. In establishing these relationships between critical factors, we are creating metrics, our key performance indicators. Tracking KPIs over time can reveal progress and thereby objectively evaluate your efforts. Without KPIs, you can't always say that you've made it better, and a single data point does not indicate a trend. I do strongly encourage everyone to chart the data that you collect. Numbers are informative, graphs are revealing. Visual presentation of the data can often bring to light trends that are difficult to see when just looking at the numbers. This is especially true when you perform some smoothing on the data in the form of averages and running totals. The laboratory business is cyclical, and that seasonality can often cloud our judgment when we evaluate our metrics. To counter that seasonality, I recommend annualizing the data in the form of a 12-month average or a running total. Displaying this type of data over time can reveal hidden patterns or trends that are otherwise obscured in the noise. Next slide, please. As an example, I offer the following chart. This is monthly laboratory revenue charted over time. The graph is noisy, and you can see here and there some highs and lows, but really no discernible pattern. However, once the data is annualized to be a 12-month running total, the chart becomes much more informative. Please advance the slide one more, please. Hopefully you're seeing what I think you're seeing right now, once again, the lag. But as you can see from the annualized data, there is now a clear trend in the revenue stream, which in this case repeats every 3 years. Obviously, the pattern changes on the back half of the chart, which does coincide with some macroeconomic factors that were affecting the economy as a whole. The point in all of this is that the trends in the data were essentially indiscernible without annualizing the information. So now that we've performed some smoothing and we've charted the data, what else can we do that might be helpful in your performance improvement efforts? Next slide. Well, at this point, you can combine this KPI that maybe you're on tracking along with a number of others into a single view and create a dashboard. This is an example of one that I've created to help manage the laboratory, and it does include those factors that I personally find critical in managing laboratory performance. These include, but are certainly not limited to, annualized revenue, revenue per full-time equivalent to measure laboratory efficiency, on-time or turnaround time performance as an indicator of potential customer satisfaction, test volumes, test per full-time equivalent, and then of course overtime, which is a very expensive cost for us when we're running busy. But by bringing these all together, this visually creates something of a dashboard and an indicator, and like a car, can help you keep the lab driving down the center of the road, so to speak. With that, here are the takeaways that I hope to leave you with and you consider as you listen to today's presentations. Next slide, please. KPIs help you identify areas for improvement and can provide insight as to where to focus your efforts. KPIs help us understand what drives our resource needs and ultimately our bottom line. They help us identify issues that affect our service and our costs and confirm that the efforts that we undertake are truly having the desired effect that we want. And lastly, they can give you that objective evidence that you need to justify that investment is required. You can take these to your CFO or your budgeting department and prove to them that you've maximized your production and that additional funds may be needed to continue making the progress that you really want to be able to do within the laboratory. So next slide. So those are the thoughts that I wanted to leave you with and things that I hope that you can think about as you go and listen to these great upcoming presentations. My contact information is there in front of you, and I would be happy to field any questions later on. I will be sticking around to the end. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to listening to the rest of the program.
Great,
Caitlin,
thank you.
hand it back.
Sorry, but I didn't mean to cut you off there. That was a great framework for the start of today. We really appreciate that. With that, we'd like to welcome our first presenter of the morning, Dr. Rob Brogel. After avoiding the real world as long as possible by remaining in school for a PhD in physics, Rob realized at his first aerospace job that academia does not prepare one for developing processes needed to properly run a lab or any other real-world operation. After clearly demonstrating his deficiencies to the organization, Rob was sent to learn Lean Six Sigma, where he eventually became a master black belt. Since then, he has applied in his methodology in technology, finance, automotive, food production, healthcare, and state government. Recently, Rob developed the State of California Government Lean Six Sigma program that has certified over 300 green belts, 40 black belts, and 6 master black belts across the state. His latest project is to figure out how to turn the Sacramento Kings into an actual NBA basketball team, but so far has had no success. Please welcome Rob.
All right, thank you. The first slide is one that I like to kind of show before we begin getting into any details. So if you could advance to the next one, I guess that would technically be the second slide. And that's a great quote from our good friend Albert Einstein. And chances are the processes that you work in today in your laboratories or other parts of the organization, when they were developed and evolved over time, there probably wasn't a lot of knowledge or thought about efficiencies, about lean, about how to do things in a manner that's effective, efficient. And so part of the program, the Lean Six Sigma program I'm going to be talking about, and really the main focus is to give that knowledge and to get a much greater understanding of how things should be efficient, what actually adds value to the customers, to the people that are relying on us to get their results. And so in order to do that, we need to make sure that we gain that knowledge, and so that we can fix the problems that were created, likely with little knowledge about those kind of process efficiencies. Okay, next please. So Lean Six Sigma, just very quickly, historically, it's kind of the merging of what had previously been two kind of separate methodologies. Lean came out of Toyota around the 50s, 60s, 70s. And it really focuses on identifying, reducing, and ultimately eliminating waste in a process. The Six Sigma component, that really contains sort of the more technical aspects, the methodology we're going to talk about, and that came out of Motorola in the 80s. And the main purpose of Six Sigma was to drive down defects, identify root causes of defects, and eliminate them from a process. And so it became pretty clear that these are very complementary methodologies, and so now they've, in a sense, been combined into one program that we're going to be talking about in the next slides. So in a nutshell, really Lean Six Sigma, the methodology behind it's really just a scientific approach to process improvement. And so it's done in phases, 5 main phases for a Lean Six Sigma project. So the first phase is the define phase, and that's just to make sure that we clearly understand and frame the problem that we're trying to fix with this methodology. The second phase is the measure phase, and that's where we gather data. We try to understand what is the current state of the process. We do process mapping, we do capability analysis, and see where we're at right now. The third phase is the analyze phase, and that's where a lot of the statistical analytical tools come into play, but we may gather data ourselves, observation. And this is where we really dig in and find what are the root causes of our problems, our delays, our inefficiencies, and really get to the bottom of what's going on in our process. And then, of course, it follows naturally that once we identify the root causes, the fourth phase is, okay, how do we improve them? How do we fix what's wrong? And there's a lot of very powerful quality and statistical tools that can really help us implement solutions to the problems that we had before. And then the final phase is, once we do that, we need to put controls in place. Some of the things you heard about in the keynote speaker, dashboards, those type of things, to make sure that we maintain the level of performance that we achieved with this with a particular project. Okay, next. So we're not going to go over this slide, but there are a lot of tools, quality, efficiency, statistical tools that go with these phases, and these are all part of the program, part of that knowledge building that we impart to the folks that go through a green belt or black belt certification. All right, next. So some of the fundamentals of Lean Six Sigma. First and foremost, it's project based. So the people that go through this program that are certified aren't just people that spend a week in a classroom or something and learn some things. We integrate the training with project work. So everyone has to come in with a project already defined, a project charter. They're going to be leading a team in their own areas, wherever that area is, that particular lab, that particular group, department. And they're actually going to be leading their teams as they learn these tools and method, and the different phases. They're going to go out and then apply these to their projects. And so certification comes not by finishing a class, but by actually successfully completing a significant improvement for their project. And so that is, and it takes about 4 months for a green belt, and then an additional 4 months for black belt certification for that. So what you have at the end of it is actual practitioners of Lean Six Sigma, excuse me, not just folks that, you know, saw something in a classroom, learned something academic, and then said, okay, how do we apply this? So we really make sure that the folks have a project under their belts for certification. The second important part is all projects have to have cross-functional teams. So we need to get the expertise of the people that are actually involved in the process. And that's going to be very important to come up with the best solutions for the true understanding of what's going on. So that's a critical part. The third fundamental is this methodology is data driven. So we make decisions based on data, identifying the KPIs, the metrics, and looking at what's really going on and not relying on anecdotes or who's highest up on the organizational chart or who thinks this is the worst problem. So we really want to use data and get to the true understanding of the reality. And then the fourth one is, you saw from the previous slide, the program gives a whole toolbox of efficiency, analytical, quality tools that are going to be invaluable for the green belts or black belts or whoever's participating going forward to be able to solve the kinds of problems that have not been solved previously. Okay, next please. So just some of the improvements that we've seen, and we've been doing this in California state government since 2014. So just a few examples that would fit on one slide of improvements we've made. And what I want to point out is that the goal of the Lean Six Sigma project is not to make an incremental improvement of 10% or 20% better. We want to make fundamental transformational improvements. And so those are the kind of gains that we're looking for. So with California Energy Commission, reducing a process from 93 days down to 5 days, work in the CDFA. We actually have the third bullet is a lab, the CDFA Center for Analytical Chemistry. So we were able to reduce their sample losses by a factor of 100. And the last one is actually still one of my favorites from the Department of Toxic Substance Control. Greenbelt was able to take a process that took 6 months and reduce it to 2 hours. So those are the kinds of improvements that we're looking for with these Lean Six Sigma projects. Okay, next slide, please. So Six Sigma, how does it apply to laboratories? Any kind of issue that you might have, a lot of ones that we've seen, you know, improving turnaround times, getting things quickly to our customers, the people that need our results, improving our throughput, being able to do more samples analysis with the current resources that we have. Improving our accuracy, so measurement system analysis, reducing errors, mistakes, lost samples, procurement supply processes, optimizing even maintenance for our equipment. So all of those are things that can be fundamentally helped and improved with the Lean Six Sigma methodology. Okay, and that brings us to the last slide, which is just my contact info. So it's pretty hard to describe a program in 5 minutes. I did my best, but please reach out to me, and I will be here at 11 for the Q&A. So I hope to talk to you more then. Thank you.
Thank you. That was an excellent presentation. At this time, we don't have any questions in the chat box, so we will go ahead and move on to the next presentation. Next, we would like to welcome Peter Husby. Peter has worked at US EPA Region 9 since 1986. He has been the director of the EPA Region 9 laboratory since 2016, and he was the team leader for field investigations and biological analyses at the EPA Region 9 lab from 1993 to 2016. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you, and it's good to be here with everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you all. First, I'd like to say a little bit about our laboratory. We are the Region 9, the EPA Region 9 laboratory. The region covers the southwestern United States, so California, Nevada, Arizona, Hawaii, the islands of the Pacific, Trust Territories, and the 148 Indian nations in our region. We work for the media programs at Region 9, so we provide analytical support to them. Our main client is the Superfund program, but we also do work for water, air, RCRA, underground storage tanks, TSCA, etc. Our lab is a ELAC certified lab. We've been in the ELAC program since the early 2000s. We are currently have between 30 and 40 methods that we maintain and operate here. And I'd like to speak to you a little bit about a paperless workflow project. So next slide, please. Our goals with this project were sort of threefold. We wanted to eliminate the use of paper for generation of analytical data, and that came from a mandate that was given to the federal government that our records, we're required to keep records. We have record retention schedules for the government, and therefore we can't get rid of anything. So we had been producing data in paper. Those would be sent to the regional record centers. Well, they can't take paper after 2022, so we needed to do something. Secondly, we really wanted to improve our streamline our workflow processes. We felt like we had a number of redundant workflow processes that we could eliminate and make more efficient. And finally, we wanted to be able to create a full documentation data package with the press of a button. So next slide, please. So before we did this process, our process was very paper oriented. We set up runs on instruments that went overnight and printed out a printout. We would look at the printout for quality, whether or not things were in control. If we needed to do reruns, we'd make annotations on it. We'd keep the paper. When we went to generate a data package at the end of the process, we would gather together all the various information. As you know, those data packages can be thousands of pages long. Next slide, please. As a result, we had all kinds of data that we had to store, and then we had to box up and send to the record centers, and we managed to kill off a lot of trees generating all that paper. Next slide. So there were sort of 4 parts to what we needed to consider and prepare as we went into this process. First was our LIMS. Was it adequate to capture, maintain, and then output to us the data that we needed to generate those data packages? Secondly, there were going to be changes in our workflow processes and procedures, and we needed to sort of change the culture of everyone about how we were going to do the work. And when we went into this, we were concerned that that might be one of our biggest problems, is getting acceptance with the new processes. As it turns out, everyone really did get on board because they quickly saw the efficiencies that were coming into the system. Second, we were going to need some additional software programs to have this process work. And really, we would also need hardware additions to what we had in terms of IT in order to make the process work. So next slide, please. So first of all, and I'm not endorsing a particular product as a LIMS, but I'm just telling you that the LIMS we have is Chromium Element. And the aspects of that we really needed in order to accomplish this were that it had batch, sequence, and calibration capabilities. We had been using it, but not to the full extent of its capabilities. It had a large integrated PDF file management system, which allowed us to capture data from multiple sources in these forms, and then the LIMS system could organize those and draw upon them to create the various reports or packages we wanted. It also has a Crystal Reports aspect to it where we can customize the report outputs that we generate from the lab. So next slide, please. So with any process, especially with a LIMS process, you can only get out of it what you put in. So if we want to get out of it a full documentation data package, we need to have every bit of information required to generate that in the system. And that meant that we needed to really fully utilize our LIMS and its features for doing sequencing, doing batching. And then we needed to generate and upload to our system all of the various pieces of information we needed, everything about our standards, our certificates of analyses, our batches, the sequences on the instrumentation, raw instrument data, chains of custody, information about equipment, ancillary equipment, pipettes, balances, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of information that needs to be there, and we needed to get it all in. Secondly, if you're going to go paperless, you can no longer write on paper. So we needed a way to document, review, and annotations to the data that would track it, both with a date and time stamp and who the person was. So we needed some way of manipulating PDFs. And finally, to really make improvements in our process, we needed to fully utilize the status and query systems within LIMS such that we could let people know where a sample was in its process through the laboratory and know what their work was, and set up queries such that on their dashboard they would see anytime they turned on what work was pending for them to do to help us get the process done. Next slide. In the hardware and software world, if you're going to do everything electronically, it's really impossible to do on a single screen or on a laptop screen. You need 2 monitors such that you can view multiple files, compare multiple things, check on things. You can't really do that efficiently on single monitors, so we added 2 monitors to every workstation and every instrument. We needed to get balance automation software so that we could automate that process of collecting the data. If you're going to make annotations on PDFs that you can track, we needed Adobe Acrobat Pro at every workstation. And finally, we needed some additional PDF creation software that went beyond the capabilities of the LIMS we have, and we got PDF Creator. Next slide. So what was the timeline? We began the implementation process clear back in like 2013, and we had to get all of the hardware we needed. We got the monitors, we got the software. We began working through the process, analysis by analysis, such that we could get all the information in for a particular analysis, and then we would move to the next one. So this happened a little bit in parallel between parts of the lab, meaning the inorganics group was working on it as well as organics, but it was in series in terms of overall bringing all the analyses into compliance with this. Over time, we went partially paperless. We quickly eliminated those printouts from the instruments. And then eventually, in May of 2016, we went completely paperless with the operation. Next slide. So I'm sorry about the size of the fonts here, but this shows our paper consumption from 2014 to 2018. And what you can see is we implemented fully in 2016. And so we saw over that time period almost a 90% reduction in the use of paper at the laboratory. Next slide. Probably more importantly, though, were the streamlining that we achieved in the process. We recognized as we did it that we had redundant review processes going on, and what we did was moved review processes up in the process to earlier times such that we could capture mistakes early, and then we didn't re-look at them later in a really in-detail fashion. We tailored the review to getting the process done efficiently. By customizing the use of the analysis and work statuses, we were really able to facilitate everyone doing tracking and knowing what their job was and when it was, and getting reviews done in a quick fashion. And a big part of that was developing queries that popped up on the desktop of everyone that told them really what was pending and what their work was. And generically, I think we did some really good qualitative improvements to our workflow as well. And it resulted in a real benefit in terms of our ability to generate data quickly and efficiently. Next slide. So after, well, we no longer have all that paper that we were looking at. We now do our reviews and our generation using multiple workstations, using multiple monitors, and having everything be electronic. Now, we didn't do this process using lean principles, although we followed them, but we do at Region 9 use lean a lot. So next slide. And one of the things we use from lean is performance boards based on metrics that we're required to report on. And this shows on-time performance at the lab. and 2014 to 2020. And the first month that turned green on this chart is May of 2016, when we implemented our official paperless electronic process. The green color is greater than 80% on time, yellow 60 to 80, red is less than 60. Now you can see that we had a couple times after we instituted this process where we had some failures. And what were those? Well, the 2019 was that the government shut down for a month and we were hampered in what we could do for work. We didn't renegotiate turnaround times, we just reported them and we were late. And then in 2020, in March, as you all know, we shut down as a country and we shut down the lab for a couple weeks before we reopened it such that we'd be available. But of course, that made a bunch of data late. In terms of all the red before, we at the time didn't think our performance was that bad because we were tracking it differently. We were looking at data, we turned out data as it came out of the various departments. And therefore, if you'd ordered 5 things and we got 4 out on time, we thought we were 80% on time. But when you go back and evaluate, did everything from a project get done on time? Well, no, it didn't, and therefore the red color shows you that. Since we implemented the process, everything has to be done in order to be reported. Next slide, please. So what did that do in terms of turnaround, actual versus requested turnaround on average? So over time, we've improved from an average turnaround of 33 days down to 19 days. And during that same time period, the requested turnaround time has also decreased. I will say this has also been accomplished while seeing a reduction in staff. So the return in efficiency and performance has been great. Next slide. So after, we no longer use paper, the forest grows, the owls love it, and the process has been good for us. And I'd take any questions, either now or later.
Great, thank you so much, Peter. We do actually have a few questions and we have a few minutes to answer them. So we'll just go ahead and get started. One question, did you think about using tablets for each analyst?
We do have a few tablets that we use for certain practices where we wanted to capture things that used to be put on paper. But generally, the analysts at this point now, they have laptops at their desks and they have desktops at their instruments.
Awesome. Okay, and did regulators approve paperless before you started the process?
Meaning the people who accept it? If you mean the people who we generate the data for, we didn't get really approval. We did a process where we generated those full documentation data packages and had them validated such that we could be assured that what we were generating provided adequate documentation and information such that a validator was happy with what they were looking at in terms of quality.
Right. How do you verify data tracking is accurate?
Well, there are multiple review processes. The data is all captured both in raw form and in manipulated form. We have we developed a number of checklists which we use through the process, which are retained as PDFs. We have review processes in place, which are, we feel, very robust. And I would say that the NELAC auditors, when they looked at our lab, found it one of the easiest that they had reviewed, and they were very complimentary about the process and the ease of looking at documentation that this process has created.
Awesome. And then can I do what you did without purchasing a LIMS using basic software that everyone has?
Wow, that that could be daunting, I think, depending on the scope of what your lab is doing. If you're not doing many methods, then perhaps you could do something. Naturally, in a lab that has a lot of methods, I think that would be hard. I'll tell you that in the EPA enterprise, there are 10 regional laboratories, and only at this point, 2 of them have sort of homegrown limbs that they developed, and the rest have used other products that came off the shelf that we then modified.
How do you lock the raw data to secure integrity?
So the PDFs are placed into, they're uploaded into the system, and there are controls on access. We haven't, how do we lock them? I'd have to maybe talk to my staff a little and think about the locking question. I know that there are limits on who can access data once it's uploaded into certain locations. So that's the best I could tell you on that one.
Are there any functions for which you kept the use of paper, and for what reason? What do you do with the C of A's for standards?
So the C of A's get scanned in through scanners as PDFs. There are still processes where we've been writing down some things on paper. We've tried our best to eliminate them, and we're slowly working at it. For instance, the temperatures on the incubators in micro, for instance, were still written on paper, and then that paper was scanned in. We've since begun implementing having automated temperature reading. There are some other examples like that. For instance, originally we had the balance daily calibration weight information on paper, which would then get scanned into a PDF and put into the system. But those were some log books that we didn't originally eliminate. We're working at getting rid of all of that. But everything, even if something is written in one of those books, it actually gets scanned as a PDF and put into the data system.
Great. We have a ton of questions for Peter, but we are out of time. So I believe he will be sticking around and answering more questions for us from 11 to 11:30. So thank you so much for all of that, Peter. Our next presenter is Eduardo Morales. Eduardo has been at WEC Laboratories for over 21 years. During this time, he has worked exclusively in the organic section, where he has been involved in all aspects of its operation, and he now serves as the organic chemistry supervisor. Within the organic section, he is responsible for the development of new analytical methods and optimization of extraction techniques, mostly for constituents of emerging concern. Throughout the laboratory, he is also involved in implementing protocols that improve the operational aspect of the entire laboratory. Mr. Morales holds a Bachelor of Science degree in biochemistry from Cal State University, Los Angeles. Please welcome Eduardo.
Thank you, and hello everyone. Today I'll be talking about how to take those first steps into becoming a more digitized lab, and why this makes sense for you and your lab and your operations. And even though this entire process can be a headache when you're foreseeing the end game, looking at it through one step at a time, it surely makes it a more attainable goal. So let's start with the why. Everybody's digital these days in some form or another, but being digital may have different meaning to different folks. It may be about having the latest technology or different form or type of communication. But since a clear definition doesn't really exist, there's no unit of measurement or accrediting body, there's not really a standard to go by. You're making these changes really for the benefit of your lab and the benefit of the data quality you provide. And by doing so, you'll notice how small changes will relieve burdens on workflows, which will make things easier and more efficient. It will also promote new ways of thinking around the lab by influencing the culture. And once the process is digitized, transcription error will be minimized, if not eliminated. But going through all this trouble and going through this process, it would also produce a more profitable lab. For example, take this chemist. She's a full-time chemist around your lab, spending about 20% of her time annually writing documents. These could involve lab tasks, filling up logbooks, stuff that needs to get approved or checked by a supervisor or manager or peers. She might be going from place to place looking for notebooks and different notes. Imagine if you could reduce her efforts by 10%. This would translate into putting another 26 days back on her schedule to do more productive, meaningful things around the lab. Now, if you could further imagine applying this same type of effort or the efficiencies to 10 more chemists. By doing so, you would be adding another 260 days into the workforce, which kind of equates to another chemist. But the best incentive behind this change is to really create a customer-first culture. This intelligent, automated, real-time system, which could get pretty complex, will reflect not only on the data quality, but also on the service you'll be able to provide your clients. There are tons of benefits to becoming digital, some of which I will not be able to get to in this talk, but just to name a few. Workflow will be streamlined. Your process will become smoother, especially as you iron out all the deficiencies. You will have access to all your data for years and decades to come. The cost of printing will be minimized, if not eliminated. And of course, you will not have the need for storage or trading services. So because whether you're renting or storing data, your facility, real estate gets pretty expensive. So why waste it by storing data where you could just create that into more lab bench and lab work? One of the benefits that got emphasized was having the remote access, especially with COVID-19. It presented many challenges for labs, but being able to work remotely proved to be extremely worthwhile effort. And of course, this is an environmental friendly change. The numbers below are the measurement of our dependency on paper, what it used to contribute. And as a lab, especially as an environmental lab, we do what we can to minimize the environmental impact. And of course, I gotta mention how many trees were saved by minimizing this paper dependency. So now where do we start? So before changing any processes, you need to start thinking about the lab as an entity, as one entity, and how all the parts come together. There are four main elements in the lab. Those are people, consumables, instruments, and software, which all take part into producing the data. Most labs manage these elements separately, but the key is to find one link, one common ground between them all, or just at least a few of them. You don't have to link all four of them. Once these workflows are connected and clear, it can be digitized and hopefully linked to a cloud somewhere, a cloud service. And so all of them work as one entity, and they're all dependent on each other and supporting each other. So asking why is important, why do it? But I think an equally important question is asking yourself, why not? Why haven't you gone through this process? Why hasn't the lab initiated any of these processes? What are the challenges or roadblocks that you see ahead of you? One of the most difficult things throughout the whole process is involves convincing people and overcoming their resistance. You will find resistance. You will find a lot of people that are not gonna be on board, but you definitely need the buy-in from all the supervisors, all the staff, all the management, so this process is successful. If managers are not on the same page and excited about it as you are, then things are not going to happen as fast or as efficient as you would like it to happen. And once that's done, you want to be able to map your current processes and propose a digital process to make sure that it's beneficial to the company, to the lab, rather than just to do it to remove paper. The goal again is not to remove paper, but to introduce more efficient process, hopefully with the help of a computer or a server or digitizing something. So again, your goal is not to remove the paper, but to make things more efficient. And to start this mind shift from non-digital to digital, it also helps to make a commitment. Talking about is a good exercise to start narrowing down the gap between planning and doing. So once the plan is in place, set yourself some goals, whether it's a year, 6 years, a month. Put yourself some goals between you and your staff, so you could actually have some sort of some sort of goal, some sort of place to reach. And also expect setbacks. Things are not going to happen your way. Things are not going to happen always the way you intended. As long as you don't get discouraged, then you're still in a good track. You want to have a few things in place when you start. First, you need to define an overall folder structure and file naming convention. Discuss these ideas with your team just to make sure you get their input and see what kind of information everybody gives you. This will keep things organized and will avoid multiple copies of documents all over the place, which is not ideal. Analyze your workflow and how documents are handled, and explore digital alternatives. Maybe there are different ways of doing things that you haven't thought of. Also decide how internal and external documents and folders will be handled and what kind of naming convention you will give them. For example, if you have memos, would you call them memos or memorandums? If you are making purchases, are you going to call them POs or purchase orders? Just to make sure everybody's on the same page and the whole process is normalized. And now you could start by simplifying processes you already have. For example, you could take the ways you do memos or you handle memos or employee reviews or corrective actions and go through your existing process and see what kind of digital alternatives are available to you. Let's take a look at an example of a document workflow. Let's say a chemist is writing a procedure. Since this will need the approval of a supervisor, it will be bounced back and forth between the two as they brainstorm. And to avoid emailing copies of the same document back and forth and having multiple instances of that document, a shared folder is created where they could both access the file. And also this is where track changes features is extremely helpful. That way you know who changed what and when they change it. Once that is completed, the document will be sent to QA for approval. And again, that could be bounced back and forth between the supervisor and QA or an even chemist, just to make sure everything is okay. Once it gets approved and gets through QA, it will be created into a PDF format, at which point a signature will be stamped on the document, whether from the managers, technical director, and everybody involved. This, I would not get too hung up on the signature just yet. If you don't want any extra expenses, you could make it as simple as grabbing a white sheet of paper and a Sharpie, signing it, scanning it, and stored in a password protected computer, and you could use it as you need it. As long as nobody has access to that signature, then you should be okay. Once it's the signature is there, it's an official document, it's going to be stored in the appropriate folder, at which point it could be accessed by anybody within the company or emailed as needed. So this is where it's going to sit until it's further needed. And if it's needed one more time for review or changes need to be made, chemists could go back to the document and use the same document to make those further changes, and we'll go through the whole process once again. A similar scenario involves handling of supporting equipment. Let's imagine a chemist who is in charge of a few pipettes. These will need to be verified to make sure they're working, and of course will need to be documented to make sure that we actually did it. Taking care of one, if you have 3 pipettes, is not that difficult. But when you have to juggle multiple units by different chemists, by different sections, by different departments in different buildings, then it becomes a tedious task and it's going to be a pain. It's going to be a job on its own, just trying to keep track of all these. You will need multiple logbooks to record all these data. They're not going to be sharing. And even having all those logbooks will require you to have a logbook of logbooks to make sure you record all those logbooks and you maintain those as well. So it's just a task on top of another task. They will of course need to be reviewed and verified on a consistent basis to ensure they're correct. And we would need to be reviewed and documented by either QA or a supervisor. So the whole process becomes very tedious. Now, if we could bypass all this tedious manual data entry and review and have one localized place for all this data to sit in instead of 100 notebooks, this will be specifically designed for your requirements and for your equipment. This will not only minimize errors and streamline the process, but also provide better overall representation of your equipment, so you'll know what your equipment is, what the status of your equipment is at all times. This could be a local or online network, which will be accessible, could be accessible by everybody in your company. They will be able to evaluate it. These could be chemists, management, QA, in even satellite location. All this data will be accessible to them without even leaving their desk. And once this has been proven and is successful, adding more features will become much easier. All you have to do is tinker with it to make sure it accepts the data that you're providing or that you're feeding in. So what is needed to start this process? Fortunately, some of the tools that you actually need, they're already in your lab. You're already familiar with them. You've used them before. So really to start this process requires minimal investment. Of course, scanners are a must, especially if you're going to archive items that are received externally, any documents or any letters. And some even come with a optical character recognition feature to help you better digitize the document and make it more searchable. Using electronic notebooks or LIMS will give you an advantage. If you are using them now, great, but if you've not, or if you haven't gone that far, it's really not a deal breaker. And at least to start this process, these will be more advantageous in the next step of the process as you tighten everything together. You will, of course, need to store your data somewhere, or your stuff that you're creating somewhere, whether you're doing or using a local or an online network. These are a few options that come with obviously different price tags and different storage capacities to accommodate any need or budget. You will also need a PDF software. Of course, Adobe is a giant in the group, but there are a lot more to choose from, again, with different price tags. So I would do your research and see what best fits your budget. To finish up with a few tips before starting, make sure that all managers and supervisors that direct operations are on board. Make sure they see your vision and are excited about this change. This will take a village, and if you have somebody who's reluctant, or if you have a bad apple, it will be more difficult and it's not going to be as efficient as you would like it to be. Once this is done, you can decide on a file structure and get everybody involved to make sure that everybody's on the same page and they know where to look, where to find things, and how to name things. And try to mimic what you do in real life. Anytime you find yourself or your staff handing out a piece of paper or something in paper form, consider an opportunity to be able to cut down paper or to improve the workflow of that process. And again, your goal is not to remove paper, to eliminate paper, but to find more efficient ways of doing things, a better workflow. Also remember to think outside the box and strive for regular improvements, because these are the little things that you're going to change here or there is what's going to create a better work environment, a better workflow. And finally, keep in mind that most of the tools that you need, you probably already have, you're probably already using in your lab. You just need to sit down and start thinking about ways of improving your regular workflow. Because with a little effort, creating a paperless environment will offer tremendous bottom line benefits. Thank you all for your time. I'm happy to answer any questions now or after the conference. You have my contact info, and I wish you all good luck.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that presentation. We do have time for a couple quick questions. I'm going to answer, a couple people have asked this question, so I think it's a great one to pose to start. Basically asking if you've had a plant outage where staff does not have access to the electronic system, or if things go down, how do you monitor and control everything after that?
Luckily, we haven't had that much any issues with that. Usually the power has not been an issue. But we do have backups. We do have the server is backed up. So if any issues come up or anything, just to avoid any losses of any data.
Right. And then are there any concerns about cybersecurity issues with having all the information stored electronically?
Also, luckily, our IT department is very strict about this, and they've enforced a lot of firewalls and a lot of security, extra security, just to make sure we don't get hacked.
Right. And then would you be able to reprocess raw data to make sure its accuracy, meaning it's not manipulated, especially with calibrations?
To reprocess the raw data? I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I didn't hear the question.
Yes, to ask about reprocessing the raw data, just to make sure it wasn't manipulated.
Yeah, any data that we have usually goes into PDFs and gets stored and archived as PDF, but all the data is also saved. All the raw data is also saved and backed up. So if we need to reprocess any data 5-10 years from now, we should be able to come up with the same number.
And do analysts use paper at the bench, particularly performing hand titrations?
So there's a few stuff that we do that we still have paper. There's some processes that we still utilize paper. We're trying to remove things one by one, as long as it's in accordance with our accreditation and just if it's makes sense for us. But we still use a little bit of paper on some events, in some cases.
And I think there's a question asking about what kind of time frame did it take for that transition to happen?
We've been doing this for at least 10 years, but the 10 years process, it's been gradual. We've been doing this organically. So we've taken it one step at a time just to make sure that we're meeting the requirements that are needed for every step. But we've been paperless, or at least started the paperless process over a decade ago.
And then I think this is the last one we'll have time for. How did you overcome concerns of staff who did not trust paperless about changes or notes being made during bench work when they converted to LIMS using tablets for data?
It's not much of a matter of trust. It's more of a matter of the workflow that we're doing. Sometimes it's hard to have people understand that this process will be easier. You just have to get over that hump of putting that extra effort and extra work to making things work. And once they do it, they never go back. I guarantee you that if I go to any analyst in my lab, they will never go back to paper anymore. It's just a lot easier to handle and a lot easier to perform the work.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm gonna hand it back to Kat.
Thank you, Eduardo. That was such a good presentation. I think everyone would agree. Next, we are going to welcome Jerry Parr. Jerry is the Executive Director of the ELAP Institute. He is also the conference organizer for the National Environmental Monitoring Conference. He has a BS in chemistry from the University of Texas and has over 40 years of experience in environmental analytical chemistry. Mr. Parr previously served on EPA's Environmental Laboratory Advisory Board on the board of the Environmental Sciences section of ASIL and on several committees in the National Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Conference. Take it away, Jerry. Jerry, you'll have to hit *6 to unmute your phone.
Work?
Yep, that's perfect. Hey, Jerry.
Okay, thank you. I didn't realize I was muted. So, well, it's a pleasure to be here and to report on something that just really developed over the last 6 to 8 months, where we now are convinced that implementing a quality management system really makes a difference in both laboratory data quality and laboratory performance. On the next slide, you will see I've put together a timeline that shows 40 years of continuous improvement. You know, this whole effort started in 1978 with the passage of the Safe Drinking Water Act and EPA developing a certification manual and then delegating authority to state agencies. But EPA only had authority for drinking water. But quickly, state programs started expanding into other media. California was one of those early adopters that did that. So did Florida, New York, Arizona, a number of other states. And then at about the same time, this EPA contract laboratory program that came out of the Superfund legislation came into being, and it was the sort of had a focus on rigorous method protocols, and so it became a de facto national certification program. And so there was an effort that began in the mid-'80s to try to come up with a national program, and it's been evolving ever since then. You can see that we've had multiple versions of the standard developed. On the next slide, I'm going to show you some information about how this quality management system developed. It's evolved over 25 years with hundreds of individuals being involved in the process. Our committee members tend to stay on a committee for 6 years and then they rotate off. So over those 25 years, we've had many people work on the standard, and it has continuously evolved. We also, as we require our committees to have a balanced interest between laboratories, data users, accreditation bodies, and other interests, and we work by consensus. We post the standards for comment and have to respond to the comments. When we were developing the 2016 standard, we probably had over 500 individuals that provided comments. And so anybody can participate in that standards development process. But up until this year, as you can see in the next slide, we've always operated under the assumption that our goal was to generate data of known and documented quality, and that accreditation is just a demonstration of competency. All it says is you're competent to operate a laboratory. It doesn't say if you really generated good data or not. But we believe that if you have been judged competent, then you probably are going to have the ability to generate quality data. And so that's sort of been our fundamental principle of this data of known and documented quality. But as you see in the next slide, for the entire history of this effort, we've had many individuals criticize this stuff and say it's all bureaucratic paperwork, has nothing to do with the data quality itself. It's just record keeping and documentation. We know we follow the method. We know we do the QC, so why do we have to do all of this other stuff that doesn't add value? So for at least 25 years that I've been involved in this, we have done all kinds of things to try to prove that it makes a difference, that it does improve data quality. But all of that was pretty futile up until February of last year when we were in Newport Beach. And I think we finally succeeded in documenting the improvement. So on the next slide, I'm just going to briefly review some of the things that we and others have done in the past on the value of accreditation. You will see that we developed a white paper where we claim that accreditation improves data quality. One of our members conducted a survey of laboratories, and all the laboratories she surveyed said, well, the laboratory accreditation benefits, there's great benefits, and it improves quality. The National Academy of Sciences evaluated the quality at U.S. Geological Survey laboratories and said implementing a quality system improves the quality. The University of Mauritius did a paper on the benefits of ISO 17025 and showed that a laboratory that had implemented 17025 was better than one that hadn't, but both of these laboratories were fictitious. 2 years ago, Curtis Wood from ERA did a presentation on proficiency testing data that said that that accredited labs get better results on PT samples than those that aren't accredited. But when you look at the data, it's like 97% versus 94%. So is that really worth the effort? So the criticism continued. As you'll see on the next slide, we got comments on all of these different things we did, not just us, but other people too, that this laboratory survey was self-serving. The white paper that we produced was, just our opinion. It wasn't backed up by any facts. The PT data was inconclusive because it wasn't that much of a difference. All of these other articles that people have written and published are all subjective. There was no definitive data to support the claim. And I have a more detailed presentation on all of these previous efforts that was presented at the National Environmental Monitoring Conference last year. And so there's a link to that there. So as you'll see on the next slide, we started to regroup and rethink what we were doing. And this started in New Orleans, Louisiana. I was confused because the picture is Jackson Square, and then we were in Jacksonville. So I've got two pictures of Andrew Jackson. So we put together a panel and said, well, what is the value of accreditation? We started looking at some of these other things we had done. And we decided that we could do a new effort. And then we continued with a special session in Jacksonville, Florida, so the other Jackson, to investigate the value. And that led us to our meeting in Newport Beach, California last February. I think many of you were there. And we had two special sessions. One was called Case Studies and Nonconformances, and the other one on how accreditation improved my laboratory. And that has led us in the last 6 months to a new guiding principle that we're calling Data You Can Trust. So if you look at the next slide, next slide, please. So this was the effort in New Orleans that we started discussing this, and we came up with this new white paper that really focused on all the other things that have been done, that accredited labs tend to perform better on proficiency testing. Accredited labs have fewer deficiencies, but again, it was still criticism. PT may not be an indicator. What do we really even mean by data quality? Can we measure precision? Do we ever know the true value? The fact is we don't. Maybe we should be looking at things other than just the value of the result. Maybe we should look at something like trust and credibility. And from that came these sort of two major conclusions. Let's let labs pick their own metric to show improvement, and let's also do a session on nonconformances. So that led us to Newport Beach, California. Next slide, please. Next slide. Again, I think many of you were there for those sessions. It was a great meeting. Pleased to say that I got to see my granddaughters again last week for the first time since February 7th, 2020. That was the last time I'd been out to California. And I got to go back out there again. My wife and I did last week. So this first session, impact of nonconformances to the quality management system. So we started talking about what is a data quality problem. Well, the obvious one that you first think on is an inaccurate or incorrect result. But maybe there's insufficient documentation. Maybe you didn't follow a mandated method. Maybe whoever is using your data doesn't have confidence in it. Maybe you didn't meet the customer requirements. So we asked laboratory assessors to give us real life examples of each of those. As you'll see on the next slide, I'm going to go through a number of these. We assigned each of them a number, and that number, like on the first one, you're going to see case study 441. That means it's section 4.4.1 of the 2016 standard. So, and this first example has to do with a municipal laboratory had a major leak in a raw wastewater pipe. It contaminated a nearby stream with significant fish kills. And the lab had only handled samples that were very low concentrations. They weren't prepared for analyzing samples at high concentrations because they didn't know how to dilute samples, didn't know how to calculate results based on dilution factors. So they were cited for not having the capability and resources to meet the requirements. The negative impact of this situation where many results were rejected, the data user and the public lost confidence in the laboratory, but by correcting and understanding how to do this correctly, they generated usable data with fewer reanalysis and regained the confidence of the user. The next one, case study 413, has to deal with documentation. And this one had to do with a fairly significant RCRA corrective action at a pesticide manufacturing facility where hundreds of samples had been analyzed. The case was going to court, and the raw data records were reviewed, and it looked like really, really good data. All the chromatograms looked great. Everything looked good, but we could not find a link between the initial instrument calibration and the continuing calibration, and every bit of that data was thrown away. So it could not be used in court. That's the negative condition, because again, section 413 says you got to have records to enable the test to be repeated under conditions as close as possible to the original. On the next slide, there's an example of a method nonconformance. And I think this one is a great one because method 1664 is a commonly used method, and it has a specific requirement that you have to use N-hexane of at least 85% purity. Well, if I used N-hexane that's 84% purity, do I think it would change the result at all? I don't think so, because it probably wouldn't make that much of a difference in the result. But this is a mandated method, and for mandated methods, you're required to follow the method as it's written. The laboratory didn't have a purchasing system or procedure to ensure they were purchasing the reagents of the right quality. So again, I don't think it would have changed the result, but the data user lost confidence in the laboratory because they violated a requirement to follow the method as written. And by implementing a purchasing system or procedure, you could generate usable data. The next slide talks about undue pressure that's mentioned in section 4.1.5 that relates to potential improper practices. And so if somebody has not been trained to avoid improper practices, then you don't know what they might be doing. And so again, it's an issue of losing confidence in the laboratory. It might not have affected the result at all, but it's an issue of trust. So again, negative impact was the data user lost confidence. By implementing a data integrity system, the laboratory regained the confidence of the user. The next one is 472, and this gets back to the section on service to the customer. And many municipal laboratories think they don't really have customers, that that their customer is internal, they work for the city, and if they were to think of a customer, it might be some homeowner or something who calls up and says their water tastes bad. But the fact is that that municipal laboratory does have a customer. It's the plant superintendent or the pretreatment supervisor or someone who is actually using that data. And so in this case, they didn't have a customer service system, and the real customer, the plant superintendent, was dissatisfied with the quality of the laboratory. And so by implementing an improvement in customer service, they were able to regain an improved relationship with their customer. So as part of the session, on the next slide, we also looked at laboratory performance problems. These first 6 case studies all related to data quality problems, but we also identified some laboratory performance problems. And these, for example, are untrained analysts or various system problems. So next slide. So this one had to do with the fact that a laboratory continually failed proficiency test samples because they didn't implement a corrective action properly. They hadn't really trained people how to do things. Or their laboratory quality control did not indicate a problem. And so again, the laboratory was cited for not having enough corrective and preventative actions and management reviews. This impact was they had lost their accreditation, had to contract out work, but by correcting this problem, they were able to regain accreditation and improve their data quality. The next example was came from the state of Texas, and it's one they say they have frequently cited when they were implementing their program, and it is basically not having a quality management system at all. And in this one, they basically said that the laboratory failed to implement the requirements in the standard, and so they were just having a huge issue, and so they were cited for not implementing corrective action for non-conforming work. Laboratories were suspended completely, unable to do any work, and had to regain correct accreditation and analyze samples. So on the next slide, I've sort of summarizes this session, that I think we showed that the quality management system requirements in the TNI standard have a direct impact on both data quality and laboratory performance, and failures to correctly implement a QMS can result of loss of accreditation, decreased revenue, reanalysis, or data rejection. Next slide. So I'm going to move over and talk about the second session we had, which is how accreditation or how implementing a quality management system improved performance or improved data quality. And for this session, we had 6 speakers from all over the United States. Some of you, I hope you were there, maybe remember Bruce Medhurst from Mammoth Lakes. I thought he did just an incredible presentation. But you can see the others: Mary Johnson from Illinois, Stacy Crandall from Virginia Beach, Dan Tomey from Houston, Tiffany Adams from Park City, Utah, and Michael Johnson from Virginia. Next slide. I'm going to briefly just come up with sort of the major findings from each of these presentations on how accreditation improved their laboratory. Again, I thought Bruce Medhurst did a great job with this quote that TNI is an insurance policy you hope you will never use, and that we owe it to our community to be prepared to identify or rule out our municipal water supply as a source of contaminants or contagion, and do it quickly. The benefits he saw were that the internal audits that identified areas of improvement, the traceability of all the reagents and standards and materials improved the validity of the data. They implemented a new document control system that made sure they were using the correct versions of methods, and they implemented a training program to ensure all their new analysts was competent. On the next slide, we talked about Mary Johnson. I thought one of the great statements she made had to do with comparing her thoughts about accreditation when they first got in the program in 2010 and where she thinks they are now. And she said in 2010, were they a better lab? She said no, but we surely were better documented. But by 2015, she had changed her position that yes, we are a better lab because we've implemented. Why are we a better lab? Because the SOPs are aligned with the methods. The documentation helped identify sources of errors. The routine internal audits ensured continued quality improvement. Training became easier, and the district that they serve started having more confidence in their data. The next slide, Dan Tomey, who operates a commercial lab, talked about that it reduced that the standard is an industry standard, it identifies the requirements that you have to follow, and it removes guesswork from identifying what is good enough. She talked about the fact that she used to, did I skip Stacy? I guess I did. Sorry. Stacy Crandall from Hampton Roads Sanitation District. You can see the different benefits she described. I thought the important one was the last one she pointed there, that by implementing a data flagging convention, they're making better informed decisions for compliance, especially in their pre-treatment program. But you can see all the other benefits as well. Now let's move on to Nantomi. And I love talking to her because she says becoming accredited, implementing the systems, she was able to sleep at night, because before then she was always having to make judgment calls on out of control situations, and her staff thought she was capricious because she would say something one day and say something different the next day. And that by implementing the TNI standard, she got a consistent approach in their corrective actions, and she gained confidence in the competency of her analysts. So, and then the next slide is Tiffany Adams from Utah. Operates a very small laboratory. In fact, it was they actually contracted out their quality assurance manager. They had a very limited scope, and they were having to subcontract a lot of tests. But once they implemented a quality management system, they were then able to take on additional tests, buy new instruments, and expand their scope, and not have to rely so much on contractors in an area that's pretty remote. And in the wintertime, it's hard to get samples to them. So, and that improvement by implementing the system allowed them to bring on a full-time QA manager. So it's an example of a small lab growing because of this. And finally, in the next slide, you can see that Michael Johnson from Blue Ridge Analytical, another commercial lab, said the TNI standard provides the laboratory with the necessary foundation for all methods, instrumentation, documentation, and personnel. That he got more reliable and consistent data, better traceability, could examine trends in QC results, more credibility, can defend their data, and better proficiency testing. So next slide. The conclusion of this session led us to the conclusion that we need to rethink what the term data quality means, that it is much more than just getting the right answer and being able to reconstruct the result. Again, that's been our guiding principle for 40 years. Quality includes confidence in the data as well as better laboratory operations. As you've seen with these examples I've presented, laboratories have documented significant improvements, efficiency, additional capability, quicker reports, and they have more confidence in their data through traceability, training, sample tracking, documentation, better decision making. So that led us to a conclusion on the next slide. And the conclusion was there is no doubt that implementing a quality management system based on the TNI standard makes a difference in the quality of the data and in laboratory performance. Our next slide. So that conclusion led us to some new guiding principles. And the next three slides, sort of cover what those new guiding principles are. And it starts with this simple concept that we're calling data you can trust. And so what does that mean? That means that that you have confidence in the data. Notice we still have the known and documented quality as part of this, but it's only one element of many others. The result. So can you go back to there? Thank you. So we believe if you implement a quality management system, the result is a good estimate of the true concentration. You've followed mandated method requirements. You have confidence in the results. You met the customer requirements, and you have better trained analysts and better systems overall for operating the laboratory. Next slide. Data you can trust also means that you do have adequate documentation for the sample, the calibration, the QC, the SOP, to fully reconstruct the process leading to the result. Everything you use in the laboratory is traceable. You know your analysts are competent. You know you handled the sample correctly from the time it was received until the result was reported out. You have sufficient quality control to document the quality, and you have reliable and transparent process throughout the entire activity. Next slide. And this is a pet peeve of mine. People use the phrase legal defensibility a lot, and I've had attorneys tell me they don't even know what that means, because any piece of data can be challenged and any piece of data can be defended, and there's many court cases, all that. But I like to talk about the fact that there was a Supreme Court case, Daubert versus Dow Pharmaceutical, that relates to data admissibility. And so what that means is that the technique has been tested, there's a known rate of error, and there are professional standards controlling the technique's operation, which means that the judge will allow the jury to see the data. It also means data you can trust means that you've reported it correctly, that you met the requirements related to detection, quantitation limits, data flagging, and things like that. So next slide. So after we got to this conclusion, and this was all work by our advocacy committee, by the way, we developed a new white paper. It's now posted on the website. But laboratory accreditation makes a difference, and we've got the subheading there, data you can rely on. The accreditation is just not about an improvement in data quality, but about generating data that can be relied on in decision making. And you can see a link to it there. Next slide. We're not done, because the current standard still has data of known and documented quality in it, and we need to change that. The language is in Module 2, or Quality System Module, Section 1.2, which is the scope of the whole thing, that right now talks about data of known and documented quality. And we want to change that to, the scope is that this document contains the essential elements to establish a quality management system that can demonstrate the laboratory's technical competence, its commitment to producing reliable and trustworthy data, its system for ensuring proper documentation of data quality, and its processes for continuous improvement. Our Quality Systems Committee is working on making that change now. It won't happen until we come out with a new standard, which probably is not going to be for another year or two, because we're also in the process of incorporating the new ISO 17025 that came out a year or so ago. And so you won't be seeing this language for a while, but that's where we're headed. So with I'm almost done, and it's next to the last slide. I wanted to talk about you folks out in California, that many of you are starting down this path. You know, we've started up a mentor program. If you're not aware of that, you can go to our website. We've already had 5 labs from California asked to be mentored, and we're starting to pair them up with mentors. You can do this. It will take some effort. It will take some time, but you will be a much better laboratory when you get there. I've got a link there to some of the resources that we have to help you. We've got it's a little free webinar that shows you all the things that are available to help you implement the program. And, you know, and California's there to help you as well. I think ELAP's been doing a terrific job with the workshops and things like that they've been conducting or planning to conduct. And on the last slide is just my contact information, and that for Steve Arms, who used to work for the Florida Department of Health. He's now retired. he's still very active in TNI, serves on our board of directors and chairs our advocacy committee. So feel free to reach out with either one of us, and I have no idea how I'm doing on time. Probably over.
That's okay, Jerry. We are a little over time, so we won't ask Jerry any questions right now, but I'd like to remind you that our presenters will be available to answer questions from 11 to 11:30. So we will, if you want to send in any questions now, we'll make sure that we get those asked of Jerry at the end of the day. Next up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Rick Danielson. Dr. Danielson was the laboratory director of IEH BioVir Laboratories for more than 22 years. As the lab was state accredited and ISO certified, he has a wealth of experience in laboratory operations and producing legally defensible data. Previously, he served as the chief of the Environmental Microbial Diseases section of the Microbial Disease Laboratory in the California Department of Health Services and as a U.S. FDA certified laboratory evaluation officer. He is a senior sales account executive with Accelerated Technology Laboratories, a laboratory automation and LIMS software company. Please welcome Dr. Danielson.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for allowing me to present today at ELAPCon. And so I'll just get right to it. Next slide, please. Okay, so as we know, laboratory automation with a LIMS can be a very complex web of interconnecting many parts of laboratory operations, whether it's just sample info, instruments, test results, you automating external inputs, whether it's from other enterprise software, third-party apps, mobile applications, and also automating the outputs. So that way you can get your reporting out and people can monitor what's going on in the laboratory. Next slide, please. Laboratories should plan on defining their specific needs whenever you're going to put a LIMS together. And everyone has different needs. That's why when you deal with LIMS companies, they'll say, hey, you know, you need a needs assessment. And what this does is defines exactly what it is you do, how your operations work. So that way the LIMS can be designed to handle all the different aspects that you're going to be using. Not everyone has barcoding, for example. Maybe some people do. I mean, this is a long list here of all the things that can be automated in a LIMS. But you know, you have to be aware that what your current requirements are, and you want to make sure that you're designing it so that way it does meet your requirements. And if you have a LIMS, have you been keeping up on your updates and on your upgrades? And your new system, if you're going to, you know, you may have to get a new system if you're not getting the capabilities out of your current LIMS. Next slide. So how does the LIMS or lab automation efficiently help in meeting regulatory requirements? It was a great presentation just before, highlighting many of these aspects that actually are tracked automatically within a LIMS, whether it's setting up your sample scheduling, where you automate your collection reminders, hold times. Every client or project, you know, will have special needs that can be tracked automatically. Calculations, things that may be laborious and prone to error, can also be automated, as well as the different level of reporting. And you can also have different enhancements, such as temperature monitoring sensors and other devices that can feed directly into your LIMS. And what I've done here is I've given some examples of where in the TNI these things are, you can find where these things are being addressed, whether it's the volume and a module number. For sample tracking, it depends on how you're going to do it. Nowadays, a lot of people are using mobile systems where they're going out into the field and uploading the data as it's collected. This eliminates the manual reentry that can lead also to error, and also it gets other people involved instead of just one person entering the information. Again, you're avoiding the transcription errors. The data is captured with timestamps. You can, if you need to have GIS coordinates, It's also possible to add samples onto a list that the sampler has been given, and all this is made to, again, to reduce errors and be able to track the sample from beginning to end. Once in the laboratory, if you're using barcoding, this allows you tracking within the lab. And when it's signed in, you get a series of worksheets, internal chain of custody, and tracking the progress of the work in real time. Next slide. Next slide. Sorry, got ahead of myself. And one more. Well, once you log in a sample, it starts a login cascade effect. Again, if you're using something like a barcode, this eliminates a lot of the login errors. But this also has a simultaneous creation of work lists and bench sheets. Tests and methods are automatically assigned. So if you have a certain matrix associated with a project or a client, you assign the proper test in advance. You assign the proper limits. This then associates the chemicals and reagents needed to do that test, so that's all traceable back to the inventory of the material, and you can follow this all the way through disposal. Next slide, please. And of course, the heavy lifting of LIMS is the LIMS instrument integration, right? So all the data output can be brought out and communicated directly. You can have a one-way communication where the instrument is just dumping data directly into the LIMS, or you can have two-way communication where once you've assigned the tests and the batch QC and all those things, then you have the LIMS telling the instrument what is the list of the tests that are all going to be run. This can be done either with a coded parser. There are also a lot of LIMS are now using third-party Excel add-ons, and that's really handy for people that are used to working with Excel. Then they can just use Excel, the advantage of Excel, and be able to speak directly or back and forth between LIMS and the instrument. And of course, sample analysis traceability with the QC batch, reagents, and standards. And this also allows for resource management. So you're able to track your calibrations to know where your instruments are and the life of their calibration. It allows you to track the analyst demonstration capability and their trainings. You may want to assign an instrument to a person, and then you're going to have due dates of training. And as those training dates come up, you may want to put warning limits as far as when their training is due, or you can put a hard limit that prevents someone from using an instrument until their training is complete. And of course, again, remote monitoring, information that you need to collect from outside to be brought in, and also tracking your general instrument maintenance. Next slide, please. So here's an example of analysis batch of aliquots. Once the tests the samples are entered and the tests associated, you get a worksheet like this that just basically says, okay, here's all the work that needs to be done. Here's all the QC samples that have to be run. And this is the order in which that we're going to run them. Next slide. And if you have required products that are needed for those tests, those will be listed out by the manufacturer, the lot number, and how much volume you're using. And again, you can even set limits that as you're using your reagents and standards, if they get to a certain low point, then you can either have an automated system that tells you, hey, you need to start ordering these things, or if you do a weekly or monthly report out of the LIMS system, it'll tell you those things that are going to be expiring soon. Next slide. And of course, control charts, a very simple representation of what's happening with the test over time, so people can see, where the tests are trending. Next slide. And reporting is in real time. This is all once the data has been entered. Then you go through a step of validation, preferably with a second analyst for peer review, and then on to final approval. And then most LIMS systems have templates for reporting, or you can customize it for a specific look, and then automatically have it sent out by email, fax, or even print if you need to have it printed out. And now there are even more sophisticated systems where you might have a cloud portal where you will assign permissions to a client where they can come in and they can access their data as well. Next slide, please. And for laboratory management, being able to just look quickly at maybe a series of dashboards where you can track your daily samples, where the samples are being distributed, turnaround times. This gives you a little bit better data management. You can see who's getting most of the work that day. Do you need to move people around to cover the work that's coming in to make sure you're hitting your turnaround times? Corrective action tracking. I know as a lab director, we would know that we had to address a corrective action with a certain number of days, and things like that would just get lost under a pile of papers on a desk, and then the big rush to get it figured out at the end of 30 days. But this allows a dashboard to give you a track on where you stand on your corrective actions and when you need to be working on it. And then built-in statistical analysis. So various formulas can be incorporated. Again, this is a big time saver for your staff and analysts. You can check on your instrument analyst analytical history, again, to see if there are any trends that are going on. Check on standard curves, your ongoing precision and recovery. And working with Excel. A lot of people work with Excel, which is fine, but are everyone in the lab using the same practice? There's a lot of errors that can happen when you have a lot of people opening up Excel files. Are they properly locked? Are the columns that need to be protected? Are people copying and pasting? Are they grabbing and dragging, which can sometimes cause errors to occur in numerical fields? So it's really important to make sure that you have tight security on how your Excel use is, but having a LIMS gets away from that because all the data is centralized and everyone has only one way to access that. Next. And then there's the audit trail, of course, for having internal audits, and you should be with a LIMS be able to go backwards and forwards, track that sample from when it was sampled, when it hit the lab, who worked on it, all the way through, all the associated reagents and chemicals, and of course, if you need to make changes, you need to be able to record the changes that were made and who made the changes and why they were made. Okay, and next slide. So with a LIMS, you can be assessment ready. No more weeks or nights before scrambling or scampering about the laboratory looking for those documents and records that you need to have for the assessment. And I want to emphasize that a quality system requires a commitment of resources and time. Now, I know that initially people look at a price tag of a LIMS and they figure, wow, I spent a lot of money on a LIMS. I want to be able to plug it in and have it go. Well, like most things, it doesn't really work that way. There's a level of commitment and just time. It's absolutely critical for lab operations. I know that from, in commercial labs, it may be perceived as non-revenue generating, but without one, you're not generating revenue because you're going to very likely not be, you might lose your accreditation for missing several items. And time, especially training time with a LIMS. I think it's really important that people make sure that when you talk to your LIMS vendor that you have the appropriate amount of time that is for your training, and don't have it all up front is my recommendation. And I think a mistake people make is they They'll have, 16, 20, 30 hours of training. They try to get it all in up front. It's way too much information all at once. And it's much better to break it up in blocks over a period of months as you're working the limbs in. Okay, and then also most limb companies have different programs for continued support, and I highly recommend that you use the support systems as much as possible, primarily because you're paying for it, and a lot of people will just keep trying to do things on their own and just waste a lot of time when they have a support system that they've already paid for. So this helps you continue to meet regulatory requirements. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that with the exception of the actual sample analysis, almost all the above things that I talked about occur within seconds of sample login. When you log in a sample and you start associating matrix, tests, and methods, all the tables, all the background tables for the limbs all get populated. And now it's just a matter of people inputting data. So very efficient, and you are able to, basically cover yourself as far as most of the regulatory requirements. Last slide, please. So I want to thank you very much, and I'll wait to questions at the end of the session.
Thank you, Richard. That was so much great information. Next up, we'd like to welcome Sarah Reeves. Sarah serves in the role of Emergency Management Program Chief with the State Water Resources Control Board. The program's responsibilities include protecting human health and safety, protecting water quality and the environment from hazardous materials, coordinating with and supporting drinking water and wastewater utilities, environmental laboratories, agencies, partners, and stakeholders, providing public information and outreach, and investigating impairments to water and drinking water quality related to emergencies. Sarah has previously worked on as an environmental laboratory analyst, both for the California private sector and the state of Oklahoma, specializing in drinking water quality, emergency response, public health and safety, and environmental protection. She has over 20 years of experience in environmental and natural sciences and holds a BS in botany from Humboldt State University. Go for it, Sarah.
Thank you so much, and thanks for inviting me to speak here today. I'm very excited to share a little bit about our State Water Resource Control Board's Emergency Management Program. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to be talking briefly about what an emergency is for the water boards, who the Emergency Management Program is, and what we do. Next slide. So it's probably pretty obvious that at the water boards, an emergency for us is involving water, but more specifically, it's any situation that poses a significant risk to the waters of the state, people's access to drinking water and sanitation, impacts to environmental testing laboratories and water utilities, and the supply chains that support these. Next slide. So the Emergency Management Program is a multidisciplinary team of 6 staff who coordinate preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation efforts for the State Water Resource Control Boards and the 9 regional water quality control boards and the state of California. The staff at EMP are not only skilled scientists, engineers, geologists, and analysts, but are also trained in emergency management through FEMA's Emergency Management Institute and CalUS's California Specialized Training Institute. Next slide. So EMP uses our cross-cutting expertise on our team to provide emergency management services for our agency and also the state of California. Some of the work that we do includes communicating with our partners such as CalEPA and CalUS when emergencies have impacted the water sector in some way. We also coordinate within our agency to support staff that are responding in the field and also in incident command systems and unified command systems. We collaborate with our partners in multi-agency task forces and represent the water boards and advocate both for our agency needs and for the water sector during and after emergencies. We also cooperate with our partner agencies who require specific services from the water board, such as permitting for certain post-emergency recovery activities. And we also help support Cali, PA with their function at the State Emergency Operations Center. Next slide. So at EMP, or the Emergency Management Program, we're an all hazards team, which means that we handle a variety of different types of emergencies, and you'll see some of those listed here on the slide. To give you some more specific examples, in 2020, some of California communities saw a complete and total loss of their drinking water and wastewater treatment plants during the catastrophic wildfires. In addition to this work, we also responded to the COVID-19 pandemic, which had all sectors and industries were extremely hit heavy by that event. EMP played a role in providing external support to the water sector, as well as internal support to the water board staff to ensure that our operations could continue during COVID-19. We also worked to support the water sector during the rolling blackouts due to extreme heat waves and the public power safety shutoff events that were implemented to reduce wildfire risk. Next slide. So EMP also helped laboratories during 2020. We partnered with the ELAP folks and have worked together closely throughout the pandemic to provide up-to-date information to the laboratory community. This included collaborating on the development of a public webpage to support the laboratory communities during the pandemic. We also worked together to ensure that laboratories understood that they were essential workers and that laboratories must stay open to support critical environmental sampling to support public health and the environment. EMP also advocated for the laboratory community to be provided vaccine prioritization prior to the new age-based directive that's currently in place. For other types of emergencies, EMP also conducts GIS analysis to find laboratories that may be impacted by certain events, such as wildfires or PSPS events. We provide this information to ELAP staff, who then conduct outreach to ensure that laboratories have what they need and can continue operations if they are or potentially impacted by emergencies. Next slide, please. And that concludes my very quick talk. I'm providing our contact information, and I will continue to stay around if there's any questions. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. That was such a great, interesting presentation. As a reminder, as Sarah mentioned, people will be staying after the conference from 11 to 11:30 after we close to continue answering questions. We'd love to have you stay and get some of your questions answered. And with that, we're going to end our day with a presentation from our very own Christine Sotelo. Christine is the Chief of California's Environmental Laboratory Accreditation Program and began her career with the California Water Boards in 1999, taking on leadership roles in the following areas: water quality monitoring and assessment, municipal stormwater program permitting and auditing, water quality investigations, and multi-agency enforcement actions, CEQA compliance and emergency management. From 2007 to 2012, she managed the Small Municipal Stormwater Program and advanced the state's regulation of stormwater quality by developing rules and policies for protecting California waters. She served as Board of Directors for her local watershed council and currently serves as the ex officio Board of Director for the California Society of Environmental Analysts. Welcome, Christine.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for staying until the end, and I'm honored to close this first ever conference. So before I begin, I must thank all of the steering committee members who volunteered their time to help ELAP plan this event, beginning with Susanna Arredondo, Charles Neslin, Michael Tooley, Stacy Fry, Augustin Pieri, Carol Wortham, Surjit Sayani, and especially to our co-chairs, Catlin Bloom and Jennifer McLaren, who were our amazing directors and producers of this event. And to our team behind the scenes, Leanne Castle, Chris Han, and Caitlin Hilty. And last but not least, to all the presenters and our special keynote speakers who took time out of their very busy life to present to all to all of you these last couple of days. There's so many brilliant and hardworking professionals in this lab industry, and I wish I could spotlight each and every one of you and your amazing work. So a sincere thank you for joining us. I hope this conference is what you all hope for, and you were able to learn, discover something new to help improve your laboratory and knowledge base. Conferences are exciting and fun, but one aspect that often falls short for me is how to transform what I learned to concrete actions beyond the conference and apply to my work, to my mission. I hope my closing talk will help you think deeply about this topic. Next slide, please. Do I see? We don't see the slides, do we? We do. All right. Okay, so is this on shared responsibilities? Okay. So I presented this slide in my opening presentation, and I think it's key to understanding the work that we are all doing and why collaboration is necessary. It's our shared responsibilities to keep California public health and the environment safe. But this conference is really about you and for you. You are the foundation, the core building block of data and all the work that we do here. And without you, none of the rest of us exists. So with that in mind, I have a question for you to think about after you leave this event. Next slide. It's a question meant to challenge each of you personally, as individual laboratories and as a whole community. What do you stand for? What are your values? What do you as an individual laboratory mean to your organization? What do you as a whole laboratory represent? And how is the community perceived by other stakeholders and by the public? Fractured between laboratory types, commercial versus municipal? There are more things that you have in common than different, and I hope you recognize and can harness your commonalities. For so long, no one was paying attention to you. Laboratories had subordinate roles, and therefore investments aren't made to help support your work. In 2014, before the move to the Water Board, ELAP and the Department of Public Health were absent, and state agencies didn't understand your value or impact and the data that you produce. I pose these questions to you because I believe in what this community represents and what you could be, and my hopes to amplify and elevate you all. Next slide. And I want to suggest to you that the time is now. Now the door is open for you to take today's challenges and make it tomorrow's opportunities to establish yourselves as a cohesive and commanding industry in our state. The pandemic put all laboratories in a spotlight. First, when reliable COVID-19 tests didn't even exist, and then when lab capacity was low and tests were backed up throughout the state and nation. It became clear to the average person how important laboratories were to our daily lives and to our health and safety. The media and politicians were talking about what you do. There likely won't be another event with this magnitude of impact in our time. Each of you woke up every single day in the middle of the pandemic, fearing for your safety, but you continued to run samples, kept the lab doors open with so much uncertainty. You helped keep California safe. You kept the beaches open for Californians to get outside from months of sheltering in place, and people felt safe knowing the water from their faucet was tested and safe to drink, cook, and bathe in. This industry never stopped through the fires, rolling blackouts, safety shutdowns, and the pandemic. You are now under an agency that understands this importance and has demonstrated their commitment to you, and our sister agencies are waking up and joining them in that position and more. And on top of that, we are already in a change period as we usher in new regulations that will improve your laboratories, modernize the industry, in California and ELAP operations. This is a huge opportunity available now for the California lab community. Next slide. So my hope for the future is that you will embrace a more prominent role in the delivery of high quality services to your organizations and in the environmental and public health safety space. But it starts in your own lab and in your own communities. You are critical to your organization and deserve recognition for that. I hope you commit to continuously improving your laboratory, producing the highest quality defensible data, and show your value to those you serve. I hope that you as a community can come together and seize this opportunity to unify yourselves, to elevate each other and assume your role and move to the forefront as the critical central building block for public and environmental health protection. I hope for the confidence to say California labs produce the highest quality data. And I hope that we can work together from here on out to make each other better, to accomplish our ultimate goal of protecting the citizens and environment of our beautiful state. Next slide. So thank you again for joining us for this inaugural event. Stay safe and be well, everyone.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was a perfect way to end the day in our conference. We would like to send a huge thank you to all of our presenters. I just want to echo Christine's sentiments at her beginning. The presenters made this a conference worth coming to. And we want to thank all of you that made the effort to be here and join us, to watch the presentations and participate. ELAP is truly honored that you chose to spend the last few mornings with us. Please keep an eye on your email inboxes in the next few days, as we'll be sending out a survey requesting your feedback about the conference. We'd love to hear your thoughts about what we did well and what you might want to see in the future. We know some of you need to go, but if you have time and questions for our presenters, please feel free to stay and listen in. And don't forget to join us on Slack. The conversation has been going strong, and we'll be keeping that channel open for at least a week so you can continue to ask questions and download the presentations from our presenters. All right, so we're going to move right back into some Q&A time. You should see some directions on your screen about how to put a question in the chat box in case you missed it at the beginning. Presenters, feel free to turn your cameras on so they can see your faces while you talk to them. And I'm just going to kind of start randomly posing questions at you guys, so stay on your toes. The first question I have is for Rob. What is the best way to find a Lean Six Sigma trainer or course? Do they need to be in person or can they be virtual?
Yeah, the preference for sure is in-person classroom training, because a lot of the work that's done and the folks that participate, you know, the training is designed around a lot of group activities, a lot of interaction, a lot of discussions, and that always happens best with people in the same area. Now, of course, with the whole COVID situation, you know, there's been kind of the need to go to virtual training. I'm very hopeful that, you know, once things go back to normal at whatever time they do, you know, to really go back to the in-person classroom training. But so that would be the program that, you know, that would be preferable, where it is highly interactive. Even virtually, if they can make it interactive, we do the whole group sessions, you know, with breakout rooms and things like that, and try to do our best to convert the classroom experience to, as best we can, the virtual experience. But yeah, you definitely want it very interactive. I know there's a lot of, I mean, you know, Lean Six Sigma, it's become a big, I mean, in the last 20 years even, it's a big money maker for consultants. And there's a lot of, you can go online and Google and see a million, and there's a lot of online, just take the online course itself. And then I even saw Groupon once for like $35 for a Greenbelt certification with, you know, with a few days online with no instructor, just going through a course. And obviously those aren't going to produce effective practitioners, which is what we're trying to do, which is what the goal is. So yeah, to find a program where you're really going to get, that's the key, is it has to be coupled with a project. So if it's just training, it's good because people learn things, but you're not going to get practitioners unless you really have a system where there's a project tied, and that's the training is interwoven with actual project work, actually leading teams, actually applying the tools. because as everybody knows, as you all know, you don't really learn something until you apply it, can successfully do that. And so at the end of the program, you want your certified green belts or black belts to really know, to have an experience, to have a project under their belt, and that they really now are a practitioner and an asset to your organization going forward.
Great. I'm going to pose the next question to probably both Peter and Eddie, since you both are probably adept to answer this. Says, I'm wondering if anyone has gone paperless for chain of custodies. Do field samplers use tablets?
I can start with this one. We have not gone paperless with chain of custody. That's something that we are looking into. There's a few barriers that we need to get over, a few humps we need to get over, but we haven't succeeded yet. But that's something that it is in the works. It is in progress. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll be able to be paperless, completely paperless for chain of custody. We are paperless in terms of storing them and how they get archived, but not at the point of sampling yet.
And I'll just add that we do have the capability of taking in electronic chain of custody. We don't often have people generate it and send it to us, so we don't do much of it.
Great, thank you. A question for Jerry. With cost associated with LIMS acquisition and annual maintenance and license contracts, can compliance to T&I be achieved without LIMS, especially for small public agencies?
Can you repeat it? That was trying to star 6. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Let me pull it back up. Was asking, are there ways to achieve T&I compliance without LIMS software for small public agencies?
Oh, yeah, yes, of course. I would say probably half the labs that are accredited don't have a LIMS.
Great. And then, Peter, this question is for you. How did you track lab consumables with Chromium LIMS?
So there's a drop down or something about consumables within Chromium, and so information would be input there using that particular module. In terms of like reagents, the reagents would be created much like we created standards. There's a form you fill out, and then you associate PDFs related to, for instance, COAs or other information about the particular chemical. You can make, of course, standards and create those, and then they connect back to the parent materials.
Great. Jerry, we've had a couple questions on this line. So asking about what it takes to be qualified to participate in the mentorship program and if there's a fee.
Yes, good question. There is a nominal fee. We require you to be a T&I member. So that's a $75 annual fee. And so we're doing this as a member benefit. And there's no other fee. The mentors themselves are all volunteers.
Okay, thank you. I have another question for Rob. It says, I really liked your honesty and humility about what you learned in the real world and not at university. Can you share the actual story of what it was exactly that led you to Six Sigma?
Oh, yeah, this was back at, well, okay, I don't want to keep this from getting too long. But it was an aerospace company in Southern California, and that was my first job out of graduate school. And so I was part of the design assurance for these satellite systems that were contracted through the Air Force. And what I was involved in a lot of when these programs go, as they progress in time, that there's very strict deadlines. One thing that aerospace does very well is keeping to schedule, because you get a contract, and 3 years from now, there's a rocket that's going to go up, and your satellite better be on that rocket, because they're not going to push it back a day or a week or a month. So they work very, very hard to meet these deadlines. That's the critical, one of the critical performance indicators is the schedule. Well, what happens it happened invariably at this aerospace company is that you'd have these various tests along, and then you'd have a test failure, and that was a big deal because that threatened the schedule, because then you got to figure out what went wrong as you're developing these satellite systems. And so you'd have these big, they called them fancy names like tiger teams and red teams that would get together. You get all the engineers in a room, you go through root cause analysis, try to figure out what happened, do more testing, come back. But that's an incredibly expensive way to go, because you've got all these expensive engineers that's supposed to be on other projects that are now, you know, charging time to this particular project. And so all of these problems kept popping up, and what people realized, you know, and this is why aerospace was one of the early adopters of Lean Six Sigma, is, well, instead of spending all this time and money fixing problems that have already, you know, that have happened, let's identify what in the process caused these test failures and really take a more process-oriented approach as opposed to essentially just reacting to fires. And they were very good at putting out fires, but they were very poor at preventing fires. And so that's when they really got into the Lean Six Sigma program. And that's what got me interested and involved in it is, okay, yeah, we put out these fires, but the fires keep coming up. So let's just prevent them from happening in the first place. And that will really improve the quality and reduce the cost overruns. I mean, all of the extra work that has to be done in fixing things that problems that should never have happened. So it was really that idea of preventing things and really understanding your processes and what really adds value and what's really critical and what are all the activities that don't add value to it, and really eliminating that, simplifying things and getting to the point where you're seeing fewer and fewer problems occurring and your schedule is much more robust. And so that's what really, you know, so that was my personal connection, was this aerospace, just that solving the problem of, instead of putting out fires and really pushing proactively, getting everything right up front so that things pass the test and then you don't have all the scrambling going on. So yeah, my inability to be able to see and prevent fires instead of putting them out, that's what got me, you know, into the Lean Six Sigma and really taking a whole focus on upfront, what is it that we need to do right, and to make sure we've got the controls in place proactively rather than reactively.
That's great. Rick, I have a question for you. In your rough estimate, how many months would it take for ATL Labs to develop and validate a LIM system, as in the example of LIMS you presented?
Well, it certainly depends on the complexity of the install, the number of people involved. You know, we worked with whole city systems where they may have 5 different satellite laboratories, a whole separate IT department, sub-departments within. Something like that can take 6 to 9 months, making sure that everyone's needs are taken care of. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you may have a 3 to 5 person laboratory where just working together, it can be done, you know, well within a couple of months. So it really depends on the complexity of the operation.
Great. Peter, I have another couple questions about consumables, so I'll just kind of tack them onto each other. Is there one person who is in charge of updating consumables and reagents in your LIMS, and are they scanned as they are used or updated manually after?
So the individuals that are the consumables would be put on as they were procured, and then their particular use in a batch is captured in the creation of the batch, and so that would be the analyst placing the particular reagent or consumable into the batch from a drop down.
Okay, perfect. And then Eddie, I'll throw this one at you. What is the longest regulatory retainment time for electronic data that you are bound by?
We hold the data for 10 years, and it's really contract dependent. Some clients would like us to keep those data or that set of data for longer periods of time. But at this point, we're retaining data for even over 10 years. It's very minimal storage. It's the expenses these days. The price of storage and servers are not maybe the servers, but at least storage, it's a lot lower. So we're able to retain data, not just data, physical data, not just the actual reports, but also the raw data for a lot longer. And these are backed up, and they are redundant, so we are able to have some stuff offsite as well, just in case something happens, there's a fire. But we're able to retain it for a lot longer than for sure if we had paper there.
Great. And then Jerry, I have another question for you. Do you need to be a TNI member to participate in any of the committees or new standard developments?
For the most part, yes. There is a clause that's called an associate member, and that's someone who's like the world's expert in a certain topic. And for example, on our whole effluent toxicity committee, we have a person from EPA who wrote the wet manual, and so she got a special dispensation to be able to participate without being a member. But for the most part, yes, you need to be a member. And let me just give you a story, because we have to follow what the American National Standard Institute requires of us, so that you can get a sense of where they are on these things. There is an association of fur trappers, and they develop standards for traps. And there is a member of PETA on that committee who detests everything they do, but they're required to allow that person to attend. And so we can make exceptions like that too, even if somebody totally disagrees with what we're doing.
Right. And then Peter, another question for you. Is there a contractual agreement between the state and EPA and regulated labs and industries to submit and accept information electronically and the use of electronic signatures?
I'm not aware that there is. What I would say about the data that we're generating electronically is that a lot of the data we generate ends up potentially being, I guess, controversial or could be involved in litigation. And we haven't had anyone yet say anything about the fact that the data is electronic or that we are using electronic signatures, but I'm not particularly aware of an agreement between regulatory agencies about that.
Okay, and then Eddie, another one for you. How do you handle your hard copy chain of custodies?
Hard copy chain of custodies are scanned upon arrival into the lab, and that is they're localized. They're placed into a folder where everybody has access to it. So whether you're project management or the chemist or sample receiving, they're able to open it at a click of a button or click of a mouse.
Great. Jerry, I have a question that I don't think you can answer verbally, but if you let us know the answer, we can maybe put a link somewhere. It says that I'm a member of TNI and still having issues finding where to apply for becoming a mentee for a mentor program. Can you help direct me to the correct spot on the TNI webpage? So if you send that to us.
It's very, very simple. If you go to the TNI website, on the home page, there are 5 colored squares in the middle of the home page, and one of them is called Mentor Initiative.
Okay. Hopefully that is enough. And then if not, Jeremy, email me and I can try and get a direct link for you.
It's a little blue box with 2 people sitting at a table. An icon of 2 people sitting at a table.
Okay. I think this one is
Jen. I will email you.
Okay, perfect. And then I think this question is for Rick. Can you give examples of commercially available limbs that can be purchased? And they're asking if you were showing star limbs during your presentation.
No, actually, I was. The examples were from Titan of ATL, but there are a wide variety. Chromium was already mentioned, and you just mentioned star limbs. There's a wide variety of limbs providers that are out there, depending on complexity. Some of them will offer both premise as well as cloud services. Some are cloud services only. Again, it has to match your best thing is, again, come up with a needs list, the things that you're specifically looking for, submit that to the vendors, so that way everybody is going to be bidding on the same thing, and then that way you also know you'll be getting what you want from the vendors. So, you know, making sure all that is well defined up front is really, really important. It's also important for the vendors, because then everyone's going to be bidding on the same thing. And there are actually independent third parties out there that will put together such things for IT use, not just for LIMS, but for any kind of software. Also, there are applications online you can go to that will help you do the comparison between premise versus cloud computing. And there are several calculators that are out there, and you need to assess all the different components of cost, not just the cost of software that it can run you, so that way you can project what the cost of a LIMS is going to be over time.
Okay, thank you. Rob, I have another question for you. As a lab, what could be the first thing I do to start the Lean Six Sigma project based on what I learned today?
Well, if you just want to kind of jump right into you know, to improvements, one of the first things that typically you do in a Lean Six Sigma project is make a map of the flow, basically a process map of, you know, the flow, if it's specifically, you know, the flow of materials through your lab, and really evaluate the process on what activities that are being done add value to the customers and which do not. And there's so if you have any lean, you know, training, you know, you learn, one of the first things you learn is the 3 criteria for a value added activity. And that's something, it's got to be something the customer wants. It's got to be transformational, so we're gaining information or something that wasn't there before, or we're actually running a test and transforming the materials. And then number 3, it has to be done right the first time. So you know, just starting off with a process map and identifying which things don't add value, and then also any data that you have on, you know, rework rates and the times that it takes to get through. So yeah, I'd recommend at least I mean, you know, if you can get your lab or get particular folks, and maybe if it's a small lab, maybe it just takes one, you know, especially if you have someone already that has a quality role. But yeah, get them, you know, through a Greenbelt Lean Six Sigma program and arm them with the tools, because there's so many opportunities in labs. There's so many things, because like with any, you know, any process, even the ones I was in the aerospace, these processes tend to have developed over years, maybe even decades, and usually without any thought to efficiency. They're often very reactive. Oh, we had a problem once, so now we have to add an extra inspection there, or we have to add an extra review, and all these levels of review that happen, especially in government, is certainly infamous for that, although certainly private sector has its share as well. And so over time, we get these very convoluted, very wasteful processes. And so, you know, it's really a matter of being willing to completely rethink fundamentally, what is it that we need, that the customers need from us? And of course, we need to understand what are our regulatory requirements, because obviously we have to operate within that context. But then finding what is the most efficient, lean way to do our processing, to do our jobs that deliver the value to the customers with as little non-value added activities as possible. So that's kind of the key in a nutshell. And you know, there are lots of tools that are out there. I mean, certainly you can, you know, read about this stuff online. You know, these certification programs, again, the ones that are really tied, that offer not just training but mentoring and coaching through a real project, will get you with practitioners that will be able to do this, you know, as Greenbelt. So, but that's really kind of the basic approach, because we do a lot of wasteful things that have just kind of gotten thrown in there over years, usually as a reaction to maybe something bad that happened. That, you know, so instead of controlling things and understanding up front and preventing those, we react to them. And that's the same thing that happened in this aerospace company that I was in. So, so yeah, that's where I would start. Maybe looking at your process, certainly but then again, there's lots of tools that are available for, through a good Greenbelt program that could be beneficial to your organization for sure.
Awesome. Peter, I have another question for you. Please describe how Audit Trail functions with all the improvements you've incorporated to your paperless systems as part of your quality control measures to ensure data integrity.
Could you say the first part of that again?
Can you please describe your Audit Trail process as part of your quality system?
Okay, so well, there's a rather lengthy process of sign-offs and check-offs. We have for each analysis there are analytical checklists which are filled out by the analyst and then reviewed by a reviewer. There are statuses through the system change as each level of review occurs. So something moves through its status from analyzed to tech reviewed. There's a couple other review processes for some of the analyses because some of the analyses are run by in-house contractors, and then a final review process occurs before it would then be reportable. So as we've utilized the status functions within LIMS to both tell people when things need to happen and then to change the status such that someone could verify that the activity had happened. And all of that is captured through a variety of mechanisms. Both some of those changes of status are automatic and some are manual. And if there are notations made about the data, for instance, on the checklist, those are signed off on and retained. They come with a date, time stamp, etc. So you're able to follow the sample through the laboratory and see at each step that it was either, picked up. There's also internal chain of custody, of course, for the samples themselves. I don't know if that answered the question.
Okay. And then Eddie, I've been trying to spread yours out, but I have a couple built up for you here, so bear with me. We have a couple people asking, what do you do with the original paper records after you scan them and save them electronically? Are the original paper records saved for the required duration of the document?
No. So depending on the document we're talking about, if once it has any signatures in it with wet signatures, once they are scanned, they're usually tossed away. We'll store them for maybe a few months just in case, because we do have some checkpoints to assure that the paperwork actually got scanned correctly and there's no glitches in the scanning process. Once that's done, they are disposed or recycled, hopefully.
Okay. And then here's another question for you. Do you keep the old version data system software in order to archive or access electronically?
Yes, we do. So we have different types of archives, and all those will, for example, if we're using a particular LIMS that's required to have a have a particular set of data that's required to have particular LIMS, that software is saved, so we're able to open it up in 5-10 years from now. Same thing goes with instrumentation software. To assure that we're able to open a file from a software that's 10 years old, we also keep that software at hand. And that software is kept electronically. We get that program and save it somewhere electronically as well. So we don't keep the CDs or USBs.
Great. Well, that is all the questions that we have built up in the chat box. As well, I want to thank again all of our presenters from today. Thank you for sticking around and answering questions. And thank you to all of our attendees for being a part of ELAP Con. And I think that ends everything for us.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.